Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the live start of our webinar dedicated to using business models, especially the Nature Smart Cities business model, to value future green infrastructure projects. This project, or this webinar, was initiated by the partnership of the Nature Smart Cities project, which is a collaboration between cities and academic institutes across various countries in the Northwest Europe region, or in the northwestern part of Europe, in the UK, in Belgium, in the Netherlands, and in France. And this project, which has been running for several years now, is fully dedicated to supporting cities make the case for choosing green infrastructures over the traditional, more straightforward, but can I also say perhaps more boring gray infrastructures to shape their cities and their public spaces. But today's webinar, we aim to show you the work that has been done in this Nature Smart Cities project. We will also share with you the preliminary results of the work that has been done, especially towards developing a business model for valuing green infrastructure projects. And we would like to present you with opportunities to engage with the project, to make use of the results and tools that are generated, and to benefit from capacity building work that the project is setting up. So we have a program set up for you where we hear from researchers and practitioners in urban green infrastructure to know more about the context, about the development, and about the prospects of this Nature Smart Cities business model. And we'll showcase various pilot projects and green infrastructure investments that have been taking place or are underway as part of the Nature Smart Cities project. So we have a quite full and diverse menu ahead of us, but we also hopefully have a nice diversity amongst our participants. And so before we dive in, I would like to launch a very quick poll to know a little bit more about you as participants. And we'll run a few questions by you. The first one is to find out what country you're from. So can you please select the option that reflects the country you're from, or if it's not on the list, the one closest to where you're from, perhaps, and let us know where you originate from. And as we see the numbers coming in, I'm curious to see if the geographical area that we anticipated to be represented on the map on the base of your registrations is nicely covered by your participation. So I wonder, colleagues behind the scenes, do we have a full count yet of the votes? So if so, we can
we have 78% voted.
78%. I'm happy at 80. So 2 or 3 people more. Please click. I would love to click myself, but I'm afraid this option has been blocked for me. So let's have the results. Maybe we can see what the participants tell us. Right, so we see the United Kingdom in the lead. The red bar is a good sign in this case. And we have a nice representation from Belgium, the Netherlands, and France as well. And I see that the second question outside of my screen has also already been launched and addressed, which was in fact to find out what type of organization you work for. So you've been diligently doing your homework as pollsters. We see that many of you, around 50%, are local authorities, which of course reflects very much the focus of the tools developed by Nature Smart Cities, complemented by regional authorities, universities, urban planners, and other. And this is always a nice, curious, mixed category to find out what other means. But maybe we'll find out in the course of today's webinar when we start interacting with you and hear more about you as participants. Now we have one final question set up, and this requires a few extra acts. I would like to ask you to grab your smartphones and open your camera, because we have set up a Mentimeter question where we would like to explore your thoughts about the concept of Nature Smart Cities. So could you please scan the QR code that's in the screen and you should automatically be directed to an open question. We would like to know, what do you think of when somebody says nature smart cities? What is the first word or the first phrase that comes to your mind? And of course, you may say that you think of the project Nature Smart Cities, but I could imagine that this concept also brings more, well, colorful or personal connotations to you, or professional ambitions or ideas. So we would like to know what you think. And I think that we see some movement in the word cloud that comes from your contributions. Learning from nature is one that comes to jumps to my eye as a very interesting angle. Green nature. So rather than thinking about cities, we're thinking about green and natural places. Biodiversity, which of course is one of the important elements of preserving and rolling out green and natural spaces also in city landscapes. There's a reference to healthy places, flowers, nature. Some of the words are actually so small that even my prescription glasses don't allow me to read everything. The environment, climate change. So there's quite a few angles that hint at your professional backgrounds and your professional interest in nature smart cities. It seems that there's a good coverage of what you could call co-benefits or ecosystem services that you can connect to the development of green infrastructure in cities. They bring extra quality in terms of green, in terms of health, in terms of nature. They bring important capacities in terms of preserving and enhancing biodiversity and adapting to climate change, two of the primary challenges of this day and age that have to be and can be addressed through developing green infrastructures. I think many of these topics and many of these angles will come up in the course of today's program if we listen to our speakers and interventions and to our panelists. So I'd like to thank you for these contributions. We'll save the word cloud and share it with you at some point later, of course, after the meeting. And at this point, I think it's a good moment to give you a little bit more background about the Nature Smart Cities project. So I would like to invite our first speaker on the screen. And her name is Anna Oxenham, and she is the project manager for the Nature Smart Cities project on behalf of Southend-on-Sea Borough Council, who is then the lead partner of the consortium of Nature Smart Cities. And Anna would like to update you on the project as well as on the program and the approach for today's webinar in more detail. So Anna, go ahead.
Great. I hope you can all see my screen, and thank you very much for your kind introduction, Taco. I just wanted to quickly introduce the Nature Smart Cities project to you all and briefly run through the structure this webinar will take. So the Nature Smart Cities project is an Interreg 2Cs project up to the value of 6.38 million euros. The project started in September 2018 and will run to August 2022. I'd like to now quickly introduce the project with the help of our short animated video.
Around 3/4 of Europeans live in cities. Many of these cities are dealing with the effects of climate change, such as heat stress, air pollution, and flooding. The high density of paved surfaces, roads, and buildings further increases these effects. We can do something about this. Trees, rain gardens, green roofs and walls, and other vegetation help to cool cities on hot summer days, capture heavy rainfall, and improve air quality. Research shows that green infrastructure provides a range of other benefits, such as increased biodiversity and improved human health. However, cities often find green infrastructure expensive or difficult to implement. The Nature Smart Cities project aims to support cities to address these challenges. 8 city partners and 3 academic partners in the UK, Belgium, the Netherlands and France have joined forces. Together, we will develop a business model to promote green infrastructure solutions, bridging the gap between research and practice. The model is based on evidence that we collect through interviews with local authorities and analysis of geographical, biophysical and economic data. We also review existing valuation tools and finance options. The model is tested, validated and refined through 7 green infrastructure pilots: Southend-on-Sea, Cambridge, The Hague, Capella, Antwerp, Bruges and Lille. A step-by-step methodology will support cities to use this business model to implement green infrastructure and build climate resilience. For more information, visit our website, naturesmartcities.eu.
So as the video described, the main output of the Nature Smart Cities project will be a business model to support smaller local authorities and municipalities, that's those with populations less than 550,000, to make the business case for green infrastructure solutions over more traditional grey approaches. A better version of the business model will be ready in January 2022, and the final version will be made available later in June and July of 2022 following our capacity building programme. And we'll hear more about that later. Today's webinar has been designed to take you through a logical story of how the project is working to deliver this business model. We will start by setting out the challenges. Firstly, we will hear from Phil about 2 inputs to support the development of the business model that have enabled us to identify and understand the challenges and barriers faced by local authorities and municipalities. And we are keen during this webinar to hear if these challenges are similar to those you may have or may actually be experiencing right now. We will then move on to describing how the business model has been developed and designed through a process of co-creation between our academic and city partners, bridging the gap between scientific research and practice. This part of the webinar will comprise of a presentation and be followed by a panel of some of our city partners, so we can hear firsthand about their experiences in being involved in the development of the business model and how it will support them to overcome the barriers they experience in delivering green infrastructure projects. This will then be followed by a summary of the results from testing the application of the business model to 5 of the 7 green infrastructure pilots being delivered under the Nature Smart Cities project. We will then hear about the business model in practice, how it will work, what it will look like, and the outputs it can provide to its users. A clear message we would like to communicate today is that our business model is still evolving. We will continue to test and refine the model with our partners, and more importantly, start to bring in other local authorities and municipalities to this process. This will help to ensure our tool is fit for purpose and meets the needs of our intended users. So lastly, to end the webinar, we will hear from Tanner from the City of The Hague, who will share information on how you can get involved in 2 opportunities to refine the business model going forward. The first being further demonstrator testing of the business model with 4 local authorities outside our project partners, and the second, a capacity building programme being rolled out across the 4 project member states in 2022. To find out more about the Nature Smart Cities project and to stay updated with news and opportunities, please visit our website and subscribe to our newsletter. If you have your mobile phone to hand, you can scan the green QR code in the bottom right-hand corner. This will take you to our homepage where towards the bottom, you will find the newsletter subscription option. We also have a very active LinkedIn page and would like to invite you to follow it. The QR code for this can be found in the blue box on the right-hand corner too. So I'll leave those QR codes up for just a moment longer, but that brings me to the end of my introduction. I'd like to thank you all for joining us this morning, and I hope you enjoy the project presentations.
Thank you very much, Anna, for this introduction in both the project and the various contributions that our speakers will give today. Before we start, I would like to point you at the fact that we hope to make this an interactive and lively webinar. And this, of course, requires and could benefit from your active contribution. After a year of webinars and Zoom meetings, you're probably familiar with all the tools that we have at our disposal, but just a quick reminder, at the bottom of your screen, you will find a Q&A section. This is where you can drop questions that are related to the content of the presentations that you hear or that you would like to address towards the various speakers and panelists that we have with us. Please feel free to ask any questions that you have. We will monitor the questions behind the scenes and make sure to either ask them live on camera in our Q&A sections to the speakers or answer them in writing during the webinar. We also have a chat function at hand. Of course, you're familiar with that as well, I suppose. And this is where you are free to interact with each other amongst participants as well, and share your observations about the program. Based on these interactions, we hope to get the most out of this webinar and your participation. As a final word, we are recording this webinar. You've probably seen this as well. The recording is foreseen to be published at a later stage as well. So please be aware, if you're comfortable with that, please continue. Otherwise, you could take measures like switching of your camera or changing your screen name if you're more comfortable with that. Let's dive in. It's time to introduce our first keynote speaker. He's already on screen. It's Mr. Phil Beck, a researcher with extensive experience in all sorts of work fields related to local governments in various settings and backgrounds. And most recently, in the past 2 years, he's contributed to the Nature Smart Cities project as a research associate on behalf of the London Imperial College. And he has been doing work to identify the challenges that should form the basis for informing local authorities to invest in green infrastructure. So please, Phil, could you tell us more about this work and your findings?
Thank you, Taco. Yes, I'm very happy to do that. I'm going to be looking in this short presentation at the challenges that face smaller local authorities in relation to green infrastructure. But these aren't just my thoughts on this important subject. These are, in fact, the thoughts of people who took part in an extensive research program. And this is the slide that Anna showed you a few moments ago with the 4 main inputs into the business model development process set out on the left-hand side here. And I'm going to talk about 2 of those. These 2. The interview study that we did looking at smaller cities' approach to green infrastructure and the challenges that face smaller cities in that kind of work, and a review that Nature Smart Cities commissioned of the finance options that might be available for green infrastructure. And both of those studies have been published, and copies of those are available free of charge in the Nature Smart Cities website library section, and I commend them to you. They're an interesting and informative read. So the research was carried out by Imperial College London, one of the academic partners in Nature Smart Cities. I worked for them at that time, and I led the research process. It was published as this booklet, Getting More Green, the key findings of a review of smaller cities' approaches to delivering green infrastructure. And as I say, I think it's full of interesting material. I think it's of great value to smaller cities working up GI ideas. What we did was a semi-structured interview process with 53 practitioners altogether working in green infrastructure in different ways. There were officers from a variety of different disciplines, but related to green infrastructure, some senior officers, heads of service, and senior managers in GI-related departments, and some elected representatives who have responsibility for green infrastructure initiatives in their local authorities. And these were all done in cities of less than 500,000 population, but many of the cities we visited were quite a lot smaller than that. The detail of what we actually did in the interviews is in the report, but essentially we were looking at what cities' priorities were when implementing GI. What were they expecting GI to achieve for them? The kind of obstacles that cities experience in delivering green infrastructure, the things that hinder that approach. And we also sought some feedback on the tools that are available to help cities assess the value of green infrastructure. So this is the results of the priorities assessment. And these are averages, and each city will have its own different set of results for this, but essentially the pattern is quite common among the cities that we visited. Anything over 1, which is the red line across the chart here, means it can be seen as a high priority for the city. Around the 1 mark means it's of some importance, but not necessarily a priority. And anything below the red line means it's not really a priority across these 53 respondents. And this chart tells us 3 things. First of all, it says what local authorities really want from green infrastructure. Secondly, what GI projects therefore need to be offering, and that offer might have to be something alongside the main purpose of the GI project. And thirdly, where these priorities might become a problem in getting an idea through the approval process. And you can see that the highest priority, and it's a high priority by some distance, is an attractive place to live. And 32 of my 53 respondents said this was a high priority in their city. This is not their own view, this is their view of how their city prioritizes things. So above everything else, cities here are looking for making the place look nicer, making the place more attractive. Which is not really one of the main priorities probably behind most green infrastructure projects. In second place comes public health. Now, this research was undertaken before the pandemic, so that might well have changed its position since then. And then below public health come 2 ecosystem services that you could say contribute to public health in terms of active travel and opportunities for recreation. But it's interesting that other ecosystem services such as pollution, heat, noise are much further down in this table. And so I suggest that the link between those ecosystem services and public health is not as clear as it could be. Resilience also emerges as a high priority in smaller cities GI, but that's mainly focused on surface water flooding. And resilience tends to get a higher priority in cities that have experienced problems of extreme weather. Now, biodiversity came out very strongly in that poll that Taco did at the beginning of this webinar. Here it only gets a mid-table ranking. It's of some importance, but it's not necessarily the highest priority for the city. That varies quite a bit between one city and another. In some cities, biodiversity is much more important than this. In others, it's much less. And carbon capture, a key plank of climate change adaptation, is a low priority. It actually comes below that red line. So projects focused on carbon capture already face an uphill challenge. They don't address things that the council thinks are important, even if the council has made a commitment to carbon reduction. And that suggests that projects in low priority areas need to be dressed up in different clothes. The multifunctionality of green infrastructure helps here because most GI projects do more than one thing, even if they have a primary focus. So that focus can be attached to things that are higher priorities. Letting an area grow wild might be good for biodiversity, but might fail as making the place look attractive. unless it was accompanied by ideas such as wildflowers or birdsong, other things that emphasize things that people like to see. Here's the obstacles ranking, and again, anything significantly over that red line can be seen as a serious obstacle. Around the red line means it's an obstacle that can be overcome, and below the red line means not really much of an obstacle at all. And the biggest challenge isn't funding. That comes second, although it's a big challenge in many cities. But the biggest challenge here is conflicting priorities. And those are usually with either housing or highways, big budget services with high level service targets to meet and high level objectives. Green isn't necessarily seen as helpful to housing or highways. It reduces the space available for housing, for instance. And conflicting priorities within the local authority is also echoed further down the list. Partnership with other departments is the fourth from bottom. Partnership with other organizations is the lowest obstacle of all. So it's actually easier for local authority practitioners to partner with outside bodies than it is with inside departments. Well, funding is there as a big issue, but so too is convincing developers, whose main focus is maximizing profit, of course, and proving the value of green infrastructure, convincing the authorities decision makers that green is worth doing, not least because of the revenue costs associated with it. And in the middle of this ranking comes council capacity. Some councils are reasonably well resourced, others are clearly not. And this mid-ranking here is an average of extremes. There are some councils that really struggle with capacity issues, others that are okay in this area. And awareness of GI is also a challenge that councils have to overcome. Awareness can even include opposition, and some of our member authorities here included climate change deniers. But the public seem to be on side. Public skepticism, not a problem. And that's increasingly the case as social media amplifies celebrity voices such as David Attenborough, Greta Thunberg, and even more radical groups such as Extinction Rebellion. Well, funding, as I say, is a problem. And Nature Smart Cities commissioned a review by a specialist financial consultant, Simon Mills, of the options and opportunities for financing green infrastructure projects, including more innovative approaches than simply looking for grants and subsidies. Simon discusses in this report, which is also available on our website, some quite sophisticated financial mechanisms like green bonds and loans, policy performance bonds, and private sector ownership of public spaces, but also more familiar ideas such as crowdfunding and philanthropy. And we explored some of this in our interviews as part of the examination of funding. Virtually no one was using any of these mechanisms other than philanthropy. And even that came with its own problems, because some of the companies that want to use philanthropy are trying to burnish a green reputation that may have become damaged by their practice. So there were concerns about greenwashing. So philanthropy is a potential source of funding for GI, but it's associated with reputational damage, and that may be too high a price for you to pay. Well, the results are interesting in themselves, and they're explored more fully in our report. But there's a bigger picture, I think, that emerges from this work. And the first element of that is evidencing the value of GI. Research elsewhere confirms our finding that it's a significant weakness for smaller authorities, the ability to present a convincing business case. Why should the municipality invest in GI? What will it gain from doing so? In some cases, the shortfall's in financial evidence, proving the value in monetary terms. In others, it's a reliance on anecdotal evidence, which can be intrinsically weak and which is easily challenged by alternative anecdotal evidence from a different point of view. Secondly, comparing green alternatives with grey. Costings for grey are generally seen as more reliable, are usually based on calculations that have been done before and which are made with trusted data. Calculations for green are often more speculative, and some benefits of green defy monetization, even though they're clearly valuable. Biodiversity is a prime example of this. Green already finds it difficult to push its way into major projects, and this weakness is one of the reasons why. And thirdly, the issues of capacity, the shortages of time, skills, and resources. It's only a mid-ranking problem in our analysis, but actually it's something that lies behind several other issues. Conflicting priorities, because green can't get a seat at the table or make its case sufficiently powerfully. Funding, because authorities lack the skills to make the bids or to manage them when they're successful in winning. And also because they don't have the funding to spend up front for those financial packages that pay retrospectively. Capacity, because green advocates don't have the arguments or the assessment capabilities to argue with developers and planners over proposals. Capacity, because green officers don't have the time to increase others' awareness of green's value and its cost effectiveness. And I think at this point, Taco is going to ask us some questions about this.
Could Lynn please launch the poll? There we are. Yes. So Phil, would you like to introduce the questions, or shall I do it?
No, that's fine. So first of all, the first question is, do these three bigger picture challenges ring true for you? Are they a big problem, often a problem, sometimes a problem, or not really a problem for you? The second question is, do you identify with these challenges in your authority? I think that's actually the same question. One is first of all, for evidencing the value of nature. Secondly, for comparing green alternatives with grey. And thirdly, this issue of capacity. Are you short of time, skills, and resources? And is that often a problem for you? Let's have your answers to these.
%50 voted.
Okay, well, I think we have 50% of our audiences from local authorities, so perhaps that's as much as we're going to get. Let's have a look at the results, Lee. Okay, so 56% of you say that evidencing the value of nature is often a problem, and almost everyone else says it's sometimes a problem. There's going to be a queue outside the office of the 3% who say it's not a problem to find out what your solution is. Comparing green alternatives with grey, again, 50% say it's often a problem, and almost everybody else says it's sometimes a problem. And on capacity, yeah, 58%. So nearly 3 in 5 of you say it's often a problem. And most of the rest, again, say it's sometimes a problem. So it seems as if these issues are not just something I've dreamt up. These are actually real issues in the real world for most local authorities, and particularly perhaps the smaller ones. So green teams need help. And that's where tools come in. There are lots of them out there. They're offering different things. They're looking at specific green benefits and so on. But most of them are hidden in academic literature that practitioners don't have time to search, to read. And even the best of these tools can fall at one or more hurdles. WITO has been looking at the tools and he's going to have more to say about that in the next presentation. But in the meantime, I'm very happy to take any questions that there are about what I've had to say.
So thank you, Phil, for this explanation on the analysis and the research that you did to find out what exactly are the priorities and the challenges of local authorities. To the audience, feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A even now if you want to ask Phil anything. A question that came to my mind, and I think you briefly hinted at this in the beginning already, but in a transnational project like Nature Smart Cities, I would be curious to know, have you found differences in the various countries, for instance, in terms of how cities or elected members prioritize different aspects of green infrastructures, or how they see challenges, or is this very similar?
Yeah, there are differences between countries. One obvious one, for instance, is that the priority that emerges for active travel is very different in the Netherlands than it is in the other three countries. And I surmise that that's because the Netherlands has largely solved the issue of active travel, whereas other countries are still working on those challenges. So that's an important difference. And there are other differences. But what I'm struck by is the commonalities between different countries. The kind of issues that come up in one country relating to conflicting priorities, they're echoed right across the spectrum here. There are cities in each of our four countries where green has difficulty in being heard and in getting a seat at the table. It's largely marginalized to the edges of larger projects, and even in cities that have commitments to net zero or to climate change adaptation, those commitments are still very much in the abstract. They're not being translated yet into formal policy on the ground, not very often.
Right, and could you conclude that there are at least two levels of where a move needs to be made in these local authorities? On the one hand, in terms of, let's say, the organizational and the practical aspects of funding, of getting the skills and the staff and the resources. And the other is much more an awareness issue, where there might be insufficient knowledge of how green infrastructures can capture carbon, can benefit pollution reduction, etc. How do you see this on the basis of this research?
Well, both of those are true. Green practitioners need a lot more help in making their case and in making a more convincing case for green infrastructure that decision makers in their authorities will find it more difficult to put to one side. I think, though, also local authorities need to take a more corporate approach to green issues. They need to own the green agenda much more than they do at the moment, and they need to set corporate priorities and then look to green solutions to address those priorities. At the moment, many decision makers, and this is particularly true of politicians, work on a short-term basis. They look to the next electoral cycle. So they want projects that can be completed and perhaps provide photo opportunities within that electoral cycle. The issues of climate change and adaptation are much more long-term issues. They're not going to be addressed in a 4 or 5 year electoral cycle. We need to develop the understanding that these are important issues that are more important than short-term solutions. The other challenge is to make these long-term changes into short-term phases that will actually meet the needs of politicians who think that way. But we need a complete cultural change, really, on these issues to say, well, you know, this is important. It's something we can only address in the long term. So let's do some long-term work.
Right, right, and start today.
Yeah.
And of course,
yesterday.
Or yesterday, yeah. Can't turn back the clock, unfortunately. We could also argue that the photo opportunities for politicians in a green surrounding are much more aesthetic and attractive, of course, than when they're posing next to a new highway.
Yes, or a concrete drainage project. Yes.
Exactly. Yes. Thanks very much, Phil, for this insight in the movers and the blockers of investing in green infrastructure. I think this is a nice point in our program where we could make the jump to showing some of the concrete green infrastructure work that is going on inside the Nature Smart Cities project. And we've prepared a few videos for you to show you what is going on the ground in various Nature Smart Cities. And in the next segment, you will be hearing presentations or seeing videos from the municipality of Capelle in the Netherlands, where project manager Henry Schokker will tell you about the revitalization project that they are running. You will see a pilot video from the completed pilot investment in The Hague in the Kromvliet Park. And you will hear a presentation from the Streekvereniging Zuidrand in Flanders about their water buffering. So enjoy the show, and I hope you get some nice inspiring images to take home for green infrastructure projects in your city.
Hello, in this presentation I give you inside information about our project Revitalisering Wemeldingen Noord. First of all, I want to show you the location of the project. Wemeldingen Noord is in the area of the municipality of Capelle. On the red arrow you see the location of our project, and on the left side you see in the project area in the north side of Wemeldingen. On the north side you see the Oosterschelde, on the right side, the east side, you see the harbor of Wemeldingen, and in the blue area, that's my project. The project, I will show you in the next slides what is our green investment project and what does it mean for our inhabitants. First of all, I gave you the reason for our green investment pilot. If you look at the area of the Wemeldingen North, we had regular problems with floodings during heavy rainfall. And on the other hand, our outdated sewage system is very inadequate, and the roads and sidewalks are quite petrified. So that is the area where we're now going to realize green pavements instead of grey. Next slide, you see on the left side you see the current situation paved and petrified, and on the new situation on the right side you see what we are going to realize. We have made a design of the climate adaptive outdoor spaces, and the design we created together with our residents and inhabitants that live in the area. In the project, the grey pavement will be replaced with green pavement. As you see on the picture, roads in the current situation is on the full length and on the full width of the road it's pavement, and you see we go to a green pavement that grass and can grow in the road, but I will show you on the next slide how it looks. Here you see the overview of our green investment pilot project. It's the view from the south side looking to the north side, and you see every road that's now looks white, that's in the pavement, and I will show you later on in the next slide how it looks. On the next slide, please. Here you see, for example, the road, and it's the situation, the current situation. You see the road as it is now, and in a new situation you see the adding by the green pavement. The total of the road is, as you see, in the middle you see a track, and that's closed pavement, and on the right side and on the left side and in the middle you see green pavement, and the cars can drive on the track you see in the middle. It's the same situation what you see in the old and now on the new situation. On the next slide I show you another picture. That not, and there are some more pictures available. The key benefits for our doing this project: first of all, we prevent flooding. By changing the pavement from grey to a green, we prevent floodings in the future. On the other hand, for us, it's very important to create some awareness by our inhabitants, because in the middle of the project, the water remains in swales, and during heavy rainfall, there is some water in the swales, and the residents become aware of the climate change. Also, another thing is that the used materials, we go to green pavement instead of grey, and for us it's also interesting, and we gain insight into maintenance, and what does it mean for current maintenance contracts to have green pavement, because for us as municipality it's our first project on this scale, and we want to see what does it mean if you have green pavement, how do you maintain it, what does it mean by have to cut the grass in the road, yes or no. All that sort of information for us it's very interesting to gain. And of course on the next slide we see also a key benefit, that's the aesthetic appreciation. And the design we made, we did it together by involving the residents, and they are involved at the start of the project. They had the possibility to choose in which scale they like the green infrastructure, and by involving our inhabitants, we create also support. And after the project is finished, we want to evaluate together with our inhabitants what is the influence of the green infrastructure on their living experience. So after the project is finished, we're going to evaluate together what does it mean to have a green pavement. On the next slide, and I hope it will come, you see also an area, and that's the a street, a road that's in the near future it will look like a green road, and we replace grey in green infrastructure. I want to say thank you, and if you want more information, we see it on the slide naturesmartcity.eu. Thank you very much.
Onze pilot is een mooi voorbeeld hoe je een park zowel leefbaar als ook klimaatbestendig kunt inrichten. We staan in het Kromvlietpark in Den Haag. Dit is een mooi gerenoveerd park waar we heel veel sport- en speelmogelijkheden hebben toegevoegd en veel groen. En dat groen heeft water nodig tijdens die hete droge periode zoals vandaag. Tegelijkertijd speelt ook regenwateroverlast, dus extreme buien die hier vallen. Dat regenwater blijft op straat staan. En om beide problemen te tackelen hebben we een nieuw systeem toegevoegd en dat is de Urban Water Buffer.
The Urban Water Buffer is an underground rainwater collector. When it rains, the water from the nearby rooftops, streets and quay flows to the central retention area in the park. The water then runs through a biofilter, where special plants clean the water. The treated water is stored in a sand layer deep underground, and during dry months the water can be pumped back up to use on the trees, the vegetable gardens and in the city farm.
Ja, kom maar jongens. Lekker naar buiten. Nou, voordat dus, zeg maar, de waterbuffer er niet was, konden we de wei eigenlijk niet besproeien. Ja, wat resulteerde in gewoon een hele droge wei. Het gras groeide niet, ja, en werd het gewoon een soort Sahara hier. En zeker nu met de waterbuffer kunnen we daar dus mooi op inspelen en gebruik van maken. En het is voor de dieren ook veel aangenamer. Zeker als het gras goed blijft groeien en het dan een beetje vochtig aanvoelt, geeft het ook wel weer een stukje verkoeling.
Ik denk dat het een van die punten hierachter is. We zitten nu in de testfase. Dat betekent dat we samen met Dunea en met het Hoogheemraadschap kijken naar de waterkwantiteit en de waterkwaliteit, voordat we het water echt in de diepe ondergrond laten.
Gaat het nog in de hitte? Ja, het gaat nog. Mensen vragen ons wel eens waarom wij bijvoorbeeld geen water leveren voor de tuin, anders dan drinkwater. Nou, dat zijn nou specifiek van die voorbeelden waar heel goed regenwater op te gebruiken is. Dus als mensen dat opslaan of als de gemeente dat doet in een urban water buffer, kan dat water dus beschikbaar komen voor dit soort activiteiten.
Dat moet wel goed koelen, denk ik.
En wij hopen dan ook dat we als beheerder van een systeem als dit ook ervaring kunnen opdoen met het stedelijke infiltratie en onttrekken van regenwater.
Municipalities in European cities often struggle to find reliable arguments to invest in climate adaptation measures, and therefore the Nature Smart Cities project is developing a business model.
Het businessmodel helpt om de waarde van het park meer inzichtelijk te maken en ook meetbaar. Eigenlijk is het vergroenen van een park heeft ook heel veel voordelen voor de wijk zelf. Het is een heel aantrekkelijke plek waar mensen elkaar ontmoeten, dus het verbetert de leefbaarheid, de sociale cohesie. Mensen zijn meer buiten, spelen en sporten, dus het doet iets met de gezondheid van de bewoners. Maar het heeft zeker ook effect op de vastgoedwaarde. En met het businessmodel willen we dus eigenlijk alle die verschillende facetten van de waardes in kaart brengen.
In The Hague, several aspects or ecosystem services were investigated. Of course, the urban water buffer scores high on water retention and infiltration. We have better social cohesion and physical activity, which we mentioned before. The new layout provides many more habitats for animals, increasing biodiversity. And like Jessica said, a green park is also a cooler park.
Onze pilot is een mooi voorbeeld hoe je een park zowel leefbaar als ook klimaatbestendig kunt inrichten.
Hello, my name is Dries Lauwers. I work for the Zuidrand Regional Association, and I will tell you some more about the Nature Smart Cities pilot we did together with the province of Antwerp. But first, some info about the Zuidrand. The area consists of 7 independent municipalities: Borsbeek, Mortsel, Edegem, Hove, Lint, Contig and Artselaar, bordering on the city of Antwerp. It has 112,000 inhabitants on a surface area of 66 square kilometers. It's a densely populated area, but fortunately it also still has some open space left. Instead of doing one big pilot, we spread our budget over 8 different pilots, 1 in every municipality and 2 in the city of Mortsel. Our focus lies on water management, because the ground levels are alarmingly low in the area, and also in the summer localized floods sometimes happen after heavy rainfall. We also focused on slow roads because recreation, green mobility, access to nature are in very short supply in this densely populated area. Today, 7 out of 8 pilots have been finished, and I will now give you a quick overview of what we did so far. The largest pilot we did was in Contig. An abandoned railroad embankment was transformed into a landscape park. We created a 4,300 cubic meter water buffer with 2 wooden bridges. We installed 3,000 square meters of permeable paths, and we planted 3,500 indigenous shrubs. Here you can see an aerial view of part of the water buffer. The rainwater from nearby streets and rooftops is led to the water buffer where it can infiltrate. So the water no longer goes to the sewers, which reduces the risk of flooding after heavy rainfall. This is how it looks on the ground. The second pilot we did was in Edegem. We installed a wooden plank path to a very wet forest area. And we were very happy to hear that the plank path was nominated for Walking Trail of the Year. We did a similar plank path in Linz. This walking path provides a missing link between existing hiking roads. In Aartselaar, a historic slow road was reopened to the public. We installed a very wide plank path to be able to be used by pedestrians and cyclists, and also semi-permeable paths. And since it was opened, it has been very popular, and it provides a safe route for children to go to school. In the city center of Mortsel, there is an old railroad embankment. We installed a walking path on it, and this provides a greener, a cooler, and a much more pleasant alternative for the very busy parallel streets in Mortsel. A similar walking path was installed in the Koudebeek flooding area in Borsbeek. And in Hove, we transformed a neighborhood playing area which had lots of non-permeable surface area. We removed the cement tiles and replaced them with a more green pavements, and we added lots of water infiltration greening areas. Here in the picture you can see the before situation, and this is how it looks today. So these pilots all have been finished. There is only one pilot left to do for us. That's on the city square of Mortsel. It's currently a very grey environment. And what we'll do is an area of over 1,000 square meters around the town hall will be greened. And this will be done in the fall, so it will be finished by December of this year. So that was a very quick overview. Which ecosystem services do our pilots provide? The pilots will make sure there is better water retention and infiltration because of the greening, because of the permeable roads, because of the water buffer. The new parking context will provide more and diverse habitats for wild plants and animals. And there are also the cultural ecosystem services, physical and mental health, social cohesion, aesthetic appreciation, recreation and tourism, because the pilots provide a place for thousands of people to walk, to cycle, to exercise, to play, and to enjoy nature. So this was a very quick overview. Thank you for your attention.
So there you have an overview of at least some of the many various green infrastructures that are being developed under the flag of Nature Smart Cities. And now it is time to dive deeper into the business model of the project that is being developed. And I would like to invite Vito van Ostaaije from the University of Antwerp to come on screen and tell us more about the concept of the business model and how it can support decision-making in support of green infrastructures. Vito, are you there?
I am here. I'm sorry. Let me start immediately. So the Nature Smart Cities business model concept is something that I will talk about. I will talk about how we bridged theory with practice. We've seen some nice examples of the practice already. Now we're gonna see how academia comes together with these ambitions of local authorities. So we've seen the challenges that Phil told us about. These are the key challenges that were identified in the beginning of the project, and I will try to explain how these challenges were included in the further development of the business model. So in this presentation, I will mainly explain how we developed the concept of our Nature Smart Cities business model. I will try to tell the journey that we have made as a consortium to reach the business model as it is defined today. I will do this by explaining how different sources of information have contributed, and I hope you will get a thorough understanding of the purpose of the business model and how it works, and the value of having said partnership between academia and local authorities. For now, I'm expanding a little bit on the different building blocks that were shown to you earlier in this scheme by Anna, and I will try to clarify how every building block has come to the concept of our business model. Finally, I will also, of course, describe this very concept. This all is a little bit of scientific background that I'm hoping to present in an understandable and accessible manner. But if it happens that you don't understand certain steps, I invite you to ask your questions at the end of my presentation. Later, after my presentation and after the panel session, my colleague Mayra Finizola Silva will then illustrate how the testing of this concept was executed on our different city pilots, of which you've seen a few in the video earlier. And there will be a few more introduced along the way. Then after Mayra, I will very concretely reveal what this business model looks like in practice and show you how local authorities can and hopefully will benefit from it. So a lot of interesting stuff ahead of us, but as I said, let me start with the background and reasoning behind all of this by explaining the building blocks. The first two building blocks were already described by Phil, as I've mentioned. Let me just remind you of one of the most important conclusions of this research. So first of all, we found that evidencing value is an important barrier. The ability for smaller authorities to present a convincing business case. So that means, why should the municipality invest in green infrastructure? What will it gain from doing so? That's something that's currently a barrier, as was also confirmed by the poll. Next, challenges lie in comparing green with gray alternatives. So being able to present green as a clear and reliable alternative to gray infrastructure types is currently very difficult. And then there's the shortage of time, skills, and resources. Concludingly, Phil also suggested that tools might be able to solve a few of these issues, and that brings us immediately to the next building block. So we conducted a desk review of a selection of existing green infrastructure valuation tools, and a few of the main conclusions of this research are listed in this slide, and they contribute to some of the gaps that we've identified in current practices and that we aim to overcome with the Nature Smart Cities business model. So first of all, we noticed that decision support tools combining biophysical and economic impacts are scarce. Most of the time, a tool chooses either to do a biophysical assessment or an economic assessment. Since ecosystem services research has been booming in the last 2 decades, something that we recommend from our review is to use this framework. So given that much research is being conducted on ecosystem services, this means that figures could be updated easily in the future if toolkits were to use this ecosystem services framework. Then tools are mostly suited to be deployed by local authorities in early stages of spatial design and planning. That's where the largest benefit lies for these tools. Next, at this moment, comprehensive data on benefits and costs of green infrastructure is limited, which leads to incomplete value assessments or assessments that only include benefits, for example, and not consider the costs. Then lastly, and this is something that we not only noticed from our review, but was also confirmed from Phil's interviews, toolkits are currently relatively unused. So one of the most important reasons for this is that we find that most of these tools are not matched with its target audience, local authorities. So in this reasoning, we claim that co-development of such tools is key to realize widespread uptake. Then our last building block, the geographical, biophysical, and economic data. For this building block, we collaborated with the Ignition project, and our colleagues from Ignition have created a very valuable database, which was perfectly fit to integrate with the purpose of our business model. And then apart from this, there was also more data collection through academic literature reviews, and this was a joint effort by the University of Antwerp, Ghent University, and Imperial College London. So combining and defining these building blocks brings us to the oversight of how we got to our business model concepts. Again, this illustrates what we believe is the most important asset of our business model: this combination of theoretical knowledge and practical insights. With the feedback loop of the demonstrator testing below, which will be explained to you later on, we believe to make an applicable framework for local authorities. So from the practice side, we've identified several features that our business model should have in order to be successful. First, it should provide arguments to justify investments. Local authorities should be able to transparently compose qualitative and quantitative arguments for a range of GI types. And this has to be done in a structured and visually enhanced way. So what is needed is a very clear and accessible method, allowing to be used and interpreted by non-experts too. These visuals can also aid local authorities to compose an intuitive and easily interpretable oversight of their investment. Next, an evidence base needs to be in place. And this can be achieved through combining previously composed databases, such as the Ignition database that I've mentioned before, and expanding this with new examples, for example, on cost data. Also, local authorities would benefit from ballpark figures for gray alternatives, because this would facilitate making the comparison between green and gray. Through our Nature Smart Cities program and through events like these, we already attempt to raise awareness. However, through the case that can be formed with the business model, local authorities are guided to communicate to different stakeholder groups, thus increasing awareness more. This is also something that we noticed local authorities would really benefit from. Then local authorities require a clear step-by-step method that guides them along the way. And of course, the business model should be practical and useful. To get from this conceptual and set of ideas to a more practical business model, there was a lot of this, and unfortunately later on more things like this and this. But by addressing all these challenges presented by Phil and combining these with the insights from the other two building blocks led us to the development of the actual business model. In this conceptual phase, we identified several goals for our business model. These are the 4 key outcomes that should be fulfilled for a project to be successful. First, the business model should be able to produce information that assists and supports decision makers. Then it needs to do this by generating estimations and ballpark figures of the potential impacts of greening interventions. This will then lead to providing the handles that will facilitate green infrastructure investments. And concludingly, the business model should be a tool that not only supports decision-making, but also project planning. The latter, the planning part, brings us to the funnel graphic on the right. We would position our business model in the initial stages of infrastructure projects. So by applying the business model at the project idea stage, uncertainties can be reduced considerably. This will lead to more desirable outcomes in the project realization stage. So the aim for our business model is very clear. It should be to take away much of these initial uncertainties. And how we will do this? We'll do this by facilitating local authorities to demonstrate the expected costs and benefits, and by providing an easily accessible framework that is widely applicable. The previous all focused on the lessons that we've learned from practice. What comes now is our attempt to address these challenges appropriately from a scientific point of view. That's why the following slides are a little bit more theoretical. So at the core of our business model will be a multi-criteria analysis. While this sounds very complex, it really isn't, and I'll try to clarify for you. So a multi-criteria analysis, the term almost speaks for itself. So in fact, we will simultaneously analyze performance of different scenarios on different or multiple criteria. This allows us to reveal trade-offs that occur, synergies, and potential opportunities to improve projects. There are more reasons to opt for this approach. First, green infrastructure is characterized by multifunctionality. This is a huge asset, but it can also introduce confusion. Sometimes this may lead to the belief that it is less suited for single purposes. With the approach of the multi-criteria analysis, we want to overcome this confusion and turn it more into the asset it was in the first place. This method, the multi-criteria analysis, serves perfectly to compare gray infrastructure with green infrastructure and even include hybrid solutions. Once again, a reminder of what Phil told us about the difficulties that are currently there. The third reason is the advantage of an MCA. The advantage of an MCA is that the assessment is flexible. So according to the type of green infrastructure, the location of the project, the desires of the user can opt for different criteria to include in the assessment. Further, the MCA is also very adaptable and responsive for users. For different stakeholder groups, the user can, for example, choose different criteria to highlight. Another advantage is the fact that we can combine qualitative and quantitative data, because as cliche as it sounds, the key to a good forecast is to not limit yourself to quantitative information. And lastly, the MCA works in various contexts and is easily adaptable to the scale of the proposed project. So, for example, for larger projects, more resources could be invested to make the MCA more detailed. These criteria, the criteria that we use for this assessment are ecosystem services. In this slide, you find a definition of the concept of ecosystem services, which is actually just a fancy way of implying all benefits that people obtain from ecosystems or from green infrastructure in this case. In our framework, we have included the following ecosystem services as criteria. For all of these ecosystem services, that means that guidance is provided on how to evaluate the impact of different scenarios on these ecosystem services. Mayra will tell you more about some of these in her presentation on the pilot testing, and you will see it in practice later on in this webinar. Then the next theoretical pillar of our assessment relates to the value proposition of our business model, or in other words, how added value is created and described. This pillar is demonstrated by the pyramid on the right-hand side. So this pyramid tells us that the whole range of benefits that we receive from green infrastructure or ecosystem services can only be captured partially by qualitative assessments. A smaller part can then be expressed quantitatively, and ultimately only a marginal fraction can be assessed monetarily. With our business model, by using all of these methods, so qualitative, quantitative, and monetary assessment, we will guide you through this flow from qualitative to monetary values, and we aim to provide an assessment of impact of green infrastructure that is as comprehensive as possible. This brings me to summarize and to once again underline the power of our approach. So it is not just a scientifically approved framework, but this scientific and theoretical foundation is tailor-made to provide answers to current gaps between theory and practice. In this way, our business model evolved into an accessible tool to demonstrate added value of a GI project qualitatively, quantitatively, and monetarily, and to straightforwardly compare it with alternative spatial interpretations. Later on, I will guide you through the steps of the business model, but now I'll just hand over to Taco again.
Thanks, Vito, for sharing the foundations of the business model with us. We'll be hearing with you in a later stage of the program more about how this will actually look and work in practice. So don't go away, and we'll turn back to you a bit later. But at this stage in the program, I would like to invite a few panel members or a few Nature Smart Cities partners to come on screen to reflect on all this work on the business model and on the challenges from their practical perspective as city practitioners. So I would like to invite, and they're already popping up in my screen, Lotte Mulman from the province of Antwerp, who works with local authorities in the province on nature, recreation and landscape development. Wiebke Klem from the city of The Hague, a landscape architect and the project lead for the Kromvliet Water Buffer Park. You've seen her star in the video already a few minutes ago. And Matthew Ling, who leads the Cambridge Canopy project in Cambridge City, which is their extensive intervention or effort to green and extend the tree cover of Cambridge City. Welcome all, you're all project partners and experienced city practitioners in green infrastructures in your countries. We've had an extensive overview from Phil Beck earlier on in the program about challenges that cities face and priorities that cities set when it comes to implementing green infrastructure projects. And I was wondering, we've seen that there's quite a big uniformity among cities and countries, but in your specific local context, are there very key or specific challenges that you face that jump out? And maybe I would like to start with Matthew. What would you mention as the first thing that comes to your mind in that respect in Cambridge?
So just to recap the question, that was just the general challenges of introducing more green infrastructure.
Yeah, but what is the dominant one in your case, perhaps?
So we're trying to grow the tree canopy cover of Cambridge by 2%. So Cambridge, for those that don't know it already or at all, it's quite a small city dominated by the historic colleges of the university. So it's quite a sort of open city, but equally compact in some ways. So there's lots of green spaces, but they are in the colleges. We have some big parks and meadows, and then actually some quite tight development in the historic centre of the city. So there's a lot of existing infrastructure where trees just cannot be planted. It's also a very old city, dating back to pre-Roman times. It was a trading centre based around the River Cams. Actually, it's been planted up over hundreds of years, so there's actually quite good tree cover here already. So we have 17% tree canopy cover. Our aim is to grow that by another 2% to 19%. So the main challenge is actually finding areas where we can plant trees. So there are a lot of trees and there's a lot of built infrastructure. So where can we do it? That's the biggest thing that we're trying to tackle.
So it's not so much the will to do it, but rather the possibility to achieve it. And maybe Wiebke in The Hague, does this echo your experience, or is there something completely different on the top of the list in The Hague?
Yes, I think what is special to The Hague is that The Hague is a city close to the sea, surrounded by big nature regional areas. And we do have a city that is growing. So within the next decennia, we need to build about 40,000 houses. So the challenge in our city is to make the city more dense with more houses, but at the same time make it more green and more sustainable. And the challenge then is indeed to find space, similar to the situation that Matthew mentioned. Find space above and underground in first sense, but also to finance the greening and to incorporate the greening of the city with the regular projects within the cities where the underground infrastructure is maintained or replaced, or the public space is improved.
Right. So these are physical and financial challenges. Maybe Lotte, you're in a slightly different situation as a provincial authority. You're not the one making cities greener, but you are in the business of encouraging cities to make themselves greener. What is the specific challenge that you face in this role?
well, specifically for the Zuidrand region south of Antwerp, 7 municipalities, as Dries mentioned earlier. The Zuidrand is very densely populated, and we try to assist the local authorities in realizing the blue-green connections. And this is what we've been working on in Nature Smart Cities as well. And there we see that the funding is a problem. It's always a combination of different types of original funds, funds coming from different organizations, subsidies, etc. But what's the problem as well is the manpower or woman power, I can say, of officers cannot be expected to be experts in all sorts of things. They mostly have very different types of tasks to do. They hand out permits, and then they have projects like these. So it's always a combination for them as well, and that makes it difficult. So that's what we as a province are trying to do as well, to assist them in these matters. And I think this is what the business model can contribute to as well.
Exactly. So it's the facilitation that you want to provide to those actors. To the audience, feel free to raise your questions in the Q&A. I can share them with the panelists in real time. So don't be shy and share your thoughts or your questions, or even perhaps your critical notes. Turning to this topic of the business model that Lotte also already addressed, why is it so important? Wiebke, perhaps you could tell us your view on this. Why is it so important to develop a tool like this to accelerate the development of green infrastructures?
Yeah, I'm very happy also with the presentation that Vito just gave, showing the link between the academic insights and the practical knowledge and experience. Because what I see is that already creating awareness for the ecosystem services framework is a very essential step towards making our cities more green. I think that being aware within, I think that all local authorities already can make steps by being aware of the different ecosystem services. This framework helps a lot. I think up to now, we're aware of the benefits in terms of recreation and biodiversity, but showing this whole bench of services, not only on the environment, but also in terms of social and economic benefits, I think is a very important step. And it shows that that green infrastructure is very substantial, and it's not just the greening as it is as it is included in urban planning processes in the past and still here and there. So that first you make all the real infrastructure, the cars, the parking lots, and the buildings, and the place that is left over is left for green spaces. I think this framework of ecosystem services shows that it's very essential to put the greening in front of all the development processes, and this is very important.
So it suggests that it could be a tool not only to make decisions, but to educate in a way. The fact of having it available makes people think differently about their public space.
I was very happy that Phil in the very beginning also mentioned it's really a mindset. It's really a change in the way we think, and in that sense, I think that this results of the Nature Smart City project also can be is a mindset. It raises awareness, and it is a perspective for new dialogues, for new collaborations and actions.
Right. Right. I see you nodding, Matthew. You could argue from your initial presentation that in Cambridge, where the main challenge is more the physical nature, and it seems that your council is very aware of the opportunities and the importance of going green, or do you still see added value in having a tool like this for your town as well?
Yeah, for certainty. I think the mindset shift is huge. So whilst there is a great a level of support, obviously, for the project and getting green infrastructure rolled out across the city, it still feels like it's not, well, yeah, maybe not to paint it up in too pretty a term, sort of playing second fiddle to grey infrastructure, you know, historically it's probably been seen as a nice thing to have, but we need to change that to it's a thing that we need to have. The whole point of the project is to build climate resilience in cities, and that's only becoming a greater and greater concern as we move forward. So it's a mindset shift, and raising awareness through tools like this is critical to getting more buy-in and uptake, and
right.
that's a really important point, because as colleagues have already said, you know, we don't want this just to be a academic process. It needs to be something that is used, is usable, and is integrated into everyday life in local authorities through project development and planning and implementation, sorry.
Right, yeah, so that integration, making sure that it is used and it becomes a standard part of the tool set is an important step towards this awareness. Lotte, do you have already envisaged, or do you have ideas about how you can use in your role this tool? Will it be something that you will be actively handing over to local authorities, or is it something you can use yourself? How do you see that?
I think both. We will actively promote it to our municipalities, but as a province we do have some types of projects ourselves, mostly related to water and smaller brooks and things like that, so we could use it ourselves there as well. But I think it's mostly something that can be used as a communication tool as well, the results, I mean, then to communicate all the benefits to the public, not only to policymakers but public as well. So I think there's lots of pluses there.
Right. So it shows diverse faces in a way, and you suggest that it is also definitely not restricted in its applicability to the lowest local territorial level, that there are different scales where you could apply it. I'm quickly glancing at my other screen. Any questions from the audience? Again, feel free to drop them. I see one coming in. So maybe I can quickly read it and see if we can share it with the panel. It's a question from Stephen, which is just at Matthew, where you ask that if you want to use increase the canopy cover as a way to know where they stand. Let's see. I'm quickly reading it.
I can
right. So yeah, you've probably been reading it yourself as well. But this is a question about how do you measure this canopy cover? So how do you quantify, in fact, this baseline and a defined target situation?
So it's purely a metric of the level of land area under tree canopy cover. So it's spatial. There's lots of different approaches to measuring it. We are currently using or carrying out a iTree study, iTree eco study. So that does on the ground sampling of tree canopy cover. There's historically we've used some aerial survey approaches using proximetry. So that's a stereoscopic aerial survey. So it measures all trees and shrubs above 1.2 meters in height. So there's various approaches of doing it, lots of clever ways of remote survey, and lots of obviously approaches of using ground truthing as well. So yeah, but in terms of sort of using it as a way of comparing and almost making cities sort of play off against each other, saying we've got more than you, it's a nice idea, but it's not as simple as that, because obviously every city is different in its makeup. Some will have more major transport infrastructure than others. Some might have more water, so more rivers or lakes, etc. So it will never be a like for like. You can make similar sort of comparisons in similar cities. So ones of similar size, of similar population, you can kind of compare those, but it's never going to be a straightforward like-for-like comparison.
It seems more like something that is relevant internally. Let's say, where are you today and where would you like to be in a greener future,
exactly.
let's say 5 or 10 years from now?
What's your ambition? What's
exactly
achievable? So we're looking at all of the plantable area. So we've taken out all of the built environment, all of the main highway infrastructure, and looking at what's left and what's practically plantable. So that's a good way of doing it.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I suppose if Stephen even wants to know more about the technicalities, do reach out and we can maybe even get you in touch with Matthew to find out more about how this works. Thanks. We have another question coming in from Pippa Halings, and I would like to put this one to Wiebke. And the question is, how easy or difficult was it to get these green infrastructure projects in your city council without the business model, moving in front of this development, as it were? How do you justify costs and benefits?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think my answer relates back to my earlier reaction on where we are and how we create awareness between the different sectoral sectors that are working on green right now. What I see in the city of The Hague is that we do have departments that are working on biodiversity, that are working on green maintenance, that are working on green planning and design, that are working on different aspects and actually different sides of the whole cycle of the ecosystem services. And right now we see that most of the green infrastructure is mainly financed from the green side, so the green maintenance part or the green biodiversity part. So of course this budget is limited, and I hope that with being able to provide more insights in the greater benefits of the green infrastructure project, so also on the socio-economic side, I hope that we can also create finance from other departments and from other internal budgets. So I hope that the business model also helps to overcome internal barriers and the sectoral organization in our organization, in order to not only bring together the experience and the knowledge, which is very important, so we can stay much stronger together if we have a comprehensive green policy plan, but we can also combine the design and the maintenance part, and of course we can combine capacity and finances.
Right, and the tool is something that can accelerate this more difficult effort that you had to do without it in earlier times. Thanks, Wiebke. I see another comment, in fact, coming in from the audience, which is interesting, from Johan Asselbergs. And he makes the observation that very often the sequencing is in the wrong order, where there's first extensive planning on the bricked and the gray parts of spatial development, and then at some point late in the process, somebody gets the bright idea to also think about adding green. And this is probably part of this mindset change that we've been hearing from some of you about as well. And it brings me to the question that I would like to ask all of you, maybe starting with Lotte. Apart from having a business model and apart from knowing a bit more about these ecosystem services, etc., what more do cities really need to do to advance the development of their green infrastructures, very concretely, to be able to make that change?
I think it's collaboration between different what you call it departments within the city, and together make a long-term plan so that you can take green into account from the very start and from the beginning, and not just at the end of the whole thing.
So long-term view, we've heard that before. It's really something that doesn't happen overnight.
No.
Matthew, and anything to add from your perspective on this?
No, I concur with Lotte. I think something like making it a policy, so introducing green infrastructure policies such that all planning and all development needs to incorporate it as much as possible. That could be something to think about.
And that's currently lacking, would you say, in many places?
I can't speak for many places, but yeah, certainly it's not something that's like in written policy here in Cambridge at the moment. We have things like climate change ratings. We're working on a biodiversity rating for development, so either introducing green infrastructure rating as well, or that could complement those, or having a higher level strategy or policy that could be something that could push it case forwards a bit more.
Right, right. Thanks. And Wiebke, how do you see this this bigger mindset and organizational change in front of us?
Yes, I think that it's very important to put green, and then really green in the sense of creating a more livable and sustainable city, more on the forefront of the agenda, and also to bring it more into the awareness of the eldermen and the decision makers. So I think in the context of the Netherlands, I think of the we have the chance that next year there is a municipal election. So I think it's very important to bring it on the agenda of the new what is it?
The new council.
The council, yeah, on the different, and this is what I see what happens already. So there are different initiatives and different organizations that say, okay, we need to invest in green and livability in cities. So, and because I really think that also we need to overcome this short-term thinking, and we need to make it really a structural solution on the long term. And this needs to start, on the highest level, on the decision-making level, and at parallel, we as the people working in a municipality need to engage and work together much more, but also together with the cities, citizens, and with other stakeholders in the city, because it's not only the local authorities or us, the municipality of The Hague, that can make the city greener and more livable, but we need to do that together with the city's inhabitants and business partners, housing corporations and developers and other parties in the city.
Right, so that's all hands on deck, really, starting at the policy development level, at the agenda level. You could argue that the easy bit is to put something on the agenda, especially if it's like a cuddly subject as green cities, but you've all mentioned the issue of finance. We have an interesting suggestion from our audience, in fact, from Jeff Harvey, who wonders if any of your cities have considered raising local taxes in order to generate funding to green the city, and whether you have any thoughts or anticipations on how this would go down with the citizens of your city. Matthew, perhaps, if there would be a referendum or a daring councillor who puts this on the agenda for the coming years to raise taxes for greening the city, would that work?
I don't think it's needed. From the constituents in the city, I think there is the willingness there and the interest. It's sometimes maybe the barrier within the council itself. I've heard stories about councils being too conservative in their outlook and not wanting to try and implement things that might be seen as being too radical. So there's that, but equally at the same time, a lot of green infrastructure approaches don't need to cost more. In fact, often probably cost less than engineered and built solutions. So let's reduce taxes, right, and just implement better.
There's that matter of perception that green is more expensive, which is not necessarily always the case, which we should convey through a business model like the one we're talking about here today. Thanks very much for your contributions and for sharing your views on how the desired reality of greener cities can be brought one step closer through the business model and the challenges ahead for cities. I would suggest that we pause here for a minute, thanking the panel speakers once again. Next up, we would like to again showcase two of the green infrastructure investment projects that are run by various partners from the Nature Smart Cities project. And you will be hearing from Jonas Lagrau from the city of Bruges and from Rachel Porter from Southend-on-Sea Borough Council about what they've been doing to improve the green face of their cities.
Hello, this is Jonas Lagroux for the City of Bruges, explaining you a bit more about our pilot Weekpark ten Boomgaard as rediscovering the Kerkenbeek. The City of Bruges is located in Belgium, Flanders, and is the capital city of the province of West Flanders. We have 119,000 inhabitants, and the city center is UNESCO protected area. We're also a coastal city with an important seaport, the port of Zeebrugge, and we try to combine sustainable urban development, climate resilience, adaptation, and tourism. The reason for our GI pilot, or the several reasons for our pilot, are many policy documents. Starting with the river contract for the Kerkenbeek Valley from the Flemish Environment Agency, and also the climate adaptation plan for the city of Bruges, because the Kerkenbeek is a flood-sensitive underground stream, still underground, and we have the plan to daylight the stream. Via this project, we have created a vision document and a framework plan for the Kerkenbeek and the Kerkenbeek path in the whole area. It contains 5 zones, and our pilot is located in the 3rd of the 5 zones. And we see this pilot as a quick win illustration of the long-term vision we have for this area. The pilot itself, Weekpark ten Boomgaard, or the neighborhood park, is a park we have in mind with focus on water experience. We want to create an open, visible, and softened Kerkenbeek Valley. The project area is about 24,000 square meters, and by opening up the Kerkenbeek and reusing the underground pipes, we will create an additional water buffer of 3,780 cubic meters. This means 70% more water buffering in this pilot area. We focused on maximum preservation of the tree stock. Some trees will have to move, other trees are sick, but we will also plant several new trees. This autumn, groundworks will start, and we hope to finish by next summer. The key pilot benefits is water retention and infiltration, because we want to daylight the Kerkenbeek, reduce the flood risk, and improve water management. Biodiversity improvement with bee-friendly planting, according to the bee plan of the City of Bruges, so not Plan A, but Plan B. And also very important is the aesthetic appreciation. We want to create a nice neighborhood park focused on water experience, and also in the framework of physical and mental health, we want to have a green-blue, safe, and special meeting place for all.
My name's Rachel, and I look forward to taking you through Southend Borough Council's pilot project today, and that's called the Launchpad Innovation Centre. So a bit of background about Southend. The borough is found in the southeast of England. It's a unitary authority and made up of 17 wards. It sits along the River Thames, just 40 miles to the east of London. It has a current population of just over 183,000 residents, and that's predicted to rise to 194,000 by 2025. This makes it the 7th most densely populated area in the UK after the London boroughs. The climate proves to be one of the driest areas of the UK, with little rainfall throughout the year and lots of sunshine. And Shoeburyness within the borough is often listed as the driest place in England. So Southend has the longest pleasure pier in the world and over 7 miles of beaches. And as such, it's well known for our coastal tourism. So on the next slide, Southend's new airport business park will allow businesses to use plots to build offices and industrial units. On the site, the council will build the Launchpad Innovation Centre, and our pilot focuses on the greening of this building as it was previously a greenfield site that was subject to local flooding. In the top right-hand corner is a map of the Airport Business Park, and the Launchpad plot is highlighted red. The Launchpad Innovation Centre aims to attract startups and SMEs, and being the first of its kind in the area. It's also aiming to achieve the BREEAM Outstanding certification, acting as an exemplar building for other developments in the area. So on the next slide, we've got the green infrastructure pilot. So the construction of the Launchpad began in May 2021, and it will be completed by June 2022. The following green infrastructure will be incorporated to Launchpad through our pilot. So we've got one large 300 metre squared swale, 2,900 metres squared of permeable paving, a meadow of over 2,000 metres squared in size and featuring over 1,800 plants. There'll also be a grass area of 1,500 metres squared, 47 trees and a green roof. So on the next slide, we've got key pilot benefits, and they are that there'll be water retention and infiltration with a core objective to reduce the flood risk. It will be an attractor for companies and investments into the local area, and acting as an exemplar, it will raise awareness and educate the community. And finally, it will be a habitat for biodiversity, attracting different species and in particular pollinators. Thank you for listening and your time today.
So there you have two more very different examples of green infrastructures and how they can be accommodated within a city and bring different ecosystem services and values. Basically, these pilots or these investments provide a foundation or a ground layer for the Nature Smart Cities project to test and validate the business model that is under development. And this testing has been ongoing already. And here to share the results of this testing with us is Mayra Finitsula Silva from the University of Antwerp, who has been researching the various ecosystem services and benefits coming from the pilots. And we would like to hear more about this. Please, again, feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A to Mayra. And after her presentation, she will also be joined by Chris Verheijen, a professor at the Ghent University, who was also involved in this work, so they can happily answer all your questions. Mayra, please show us the way in the wonderful world of ecosystem services.
Of course, thank you for the introduction. So if everything's okay, you can see my screen. Right.
All good.
Okay, so I will present the business model pilot testing. Let me just, next slide. As Vito mentioned in his presentation, introducing the business model, a key component of our Nature Smart Cities business model is the fact that it is designed and created in collaboration with local authorities in a 2Cs area. So while these local authorities contributed to the conceptual development of this business model, their incredibly valuable pilot cases contributed to the testing this reasoning and validating the steps in the multi-criteria analysis that we envisioned. So what specifically is the role of this pilot testing, and consequently, what does this session contribute to the webinar? First of all, being able to test the concept that Vito has explained on real life examples taught us many valuable lessons about possibilities and feasibility. So it helps to shape this conceptual idea into an applicable step-by-step workflow. Though applying our multi-criteria approach on the different pilot cases, we again gain new insights to refine the final product of our business model, which Vito will present later on. More, it contributed to distinguishing between methods and answering questions like which methods are feasible for local authorities and how can we obtain reliable results without extensive input from the user. An important element of any tool is the fact that it is reliable and accurate by cross-validating the business model results with results from applied scientific studies. We aim to deliver just that. So, one of the key objectives of the Nature Smart Cities business model is to demonstrate the impact of green infrastructure. It is thus of vital importance that communicating these results is done in a clear and easy interpretable manner. In what follows, I will introduce you some of the pilot testing results. Also, these results are quite similar to the results that you can obtain from using the business model in the future. So it provides a great example for what is feasible by applying the business model to your case in your municipality. So, which already explained a bit about ecosystem services. I will shortly repeat, since I will be talking a lot about ecosystem services. So ecosystem services are the benefits people obtain from ecosystems, so in this case, green infrastructure. So this scheme clearly illustrates the ecosystem services we focus on. Nevertheless, there are also other ecosystem services which are not on this scheme, and sometimes names might differ. So for every ecosystem service I will discuss in this presentation, I will shortly explain what the ecosystem service entails and how the impact was measured. So the Nature Smart Cities projects works with 7 city partners, and some city partners have multiple pilot projects. This means that a lot of research needed to be done. Therefore, Nature Smart City called upon many master students to use this opportunity to write an interesting and useful dissertation about one or more pilot projects under the supervision of Ghent University or the University of Antwerp. So in general, the students compared a gray or a before scenario and a greener scenario to determine the impact of green infrastructure on the ecosystem services. In other words, which benefits can be created by implementing more green infrastructure. So since our time is limited, I will focus on 5 pilot projects and 7 ecosystem services. So at the beginning of the project, the local authorities chose which ecosystem services they wanted to focus on, as you can see on this table. Since I don't have the time to go over all the results, I will discuss 2 pilot projects for every ecosystem service, beginning with water retention and infiltration. So for this ecosystem service, I will look into the case of Antwerp-Zuidrand and The Hague, and I will firstly short explain what water retention and infiltration actually refers to. So these 2 rather small pictures illustrate what happened with precipitation in a green or a gray scenario. So the picture on the left shows a gray scenario with a lot of impermeable surface, meaning that rainwater often flows to the sewage system. Whereas on the right side, you see a green scenario with a lot of nature and this permeable surface, meaning that a lot of rainfall infiltrates the soil and is kept out of the sewage system. So in other words, green elements have the capacity to absorb and infiltrate precipitation. This is beneficial for several reasons. First, surface runoff is reduced, thereby lowering flood risk, which is especially relevant in light of the increasing extreme weather events. Secondly, replenishing groundwater levels, which is also very important during dry periods. Lastly, captured rainwater can be reused for multiple purposes, such as irrigation. So the more water is absorbed by nature, the less runoff will go to the sewage system, which actually saves us money. So how do we calculate the amount of stormwater runoff retained by nature? So we first needed to know how much green infrastructure was implemented and which kind of infrastructure. Then by using the retention coefficient, this coefficient denotes how much of the precipitation is retained by green infrastructure, we could calculate the avoided runoff. By means of an example, when it rains in an area with mostly grassland, 78% of the rainfall is retained by the green infrastructure, and the other 22% will flow away, often to the sewage system. Another example, whereas it rains above a pond or a lake, almost all water will be retained if the capacity is big enough. So no other runoff will go to the sewage system. So the first case, the De Hague case, the Convitpark, we calculated the avoided runoff for the before and the after scenario. In the after scenario, the impermeable surface did not really decrease, but there was a lot of new green infrastructure and more diversity. Moreover, an urban water buffer was added. So we calculated for the gray scenario that there was an avoided runoff of 10,700 cubic meters a year, which is more or less 55% of the total amount of rainfall that falls in the park. Whereas in the green scenario, it would be 11,200 cubic meters a year, which is more or less 58% of the total amount of rainfall on the project area. This is a small difference. However, this value did not include the urban water buffer. So this means that almost all precipitation that falls into the park or is absorbed by nature or will flow to the urban water buffer. So since the vegetation in the after scenario can reduce runoff with more or less 11,200 cubic meters, the urban water buffer will store the remaining 8,133 cubic meters of rainfall in the urban water buffer. But since the urban water buffer has a capacity of 35,000 cubic meters, runoff from adjacent streets and roofs is also collected in the urban water buffer. So the difference between the gray and the green scenario is more or less 35,500 cubic meters of runoff each year that is collected or in the urban water buffer or absorbed by nature. This is not one, not two, not three, but 14 Olympic swimming pools of avoided runoff each year. So for the second pilot case, I will go to the Antwerpen-Zuidrand or the Contig case, which had an old railway verge, which is now transformed to a blue-green park track. So we calculated that in the before scenario, 25,400 cubic meters of rainfall a year was absorbed by nature. This is more or less 9% of the total amount of rainfall. In the after, this did decrease a little bit to 23,800, which is 88% of the annual rainfall. But again, this does not give a full view of the case, since there is also a natural water basin of 4,000 with a capacity of 4,300 cubic meters, meaning that the rain that is not absorbed by nature will flow to the urban water, to the natural water basin. Furthermore, runoff from adjacent streets will also flow to the natural water basin. So it has the potential to reduce the runoff with more than 10,000 cubic meters a year, but it also depends of the evaporation and how much water will infiltrate the soil from the natural water basin. Again, the difference between the gray and the green scenario is this 8,700 cubic meters of avoided runoff each year, which is 3.5 Olympic swimming pools. So regarding this next ecosystem service, microclimate regulation, I will discuss the Capella case and Southend. So the ecosystem service microclimate regulation refers to the local cooling effect of green infrastructure. Research has shown a rise in urban temperatures, which has a negative impact on human health. Furthermore, it's often associated with the urban heat island effect, a phenomenon in which urban space exhibits higher temperatures than surrounding unurbanized areas due to the combination of huge amounts of paved surfaces, low evaporation, and low ventilation. Green infrastructure, on the other hand, has been identified as an effective strategy to moderate the negative effects of urban warming through shading, evaporation, cooling, and the modification of airflows. But this is a difficult ecosystem service to actually quantify. So we use a method by Ziegler et al. This method calculates the difference in temperature in a certain region with and without green infrastructure. More specific, by dividing the project area in circles of 30 meters and comparing the percentage of paved surface with the percentage of green coverage, we could calculate a temperature difference. So for the Capella case, was found that there was an average of 0.15 degrees Celsius cooler than the reference point outside the project area. This can be explained also because Wemeldingen North or Capella is close to the seaside, which is already cooler than other regions. Nevertheless, the calculations also show a temperature reduction of 0.24 degrees Celsius in the after scenario. Of course, this seems like a very small change, but we can't forget that the cooling effect might increase with the growth of the trees. Another side note I want to make is that there is also a lot of private property and gardens, which the municipality, of course, needs to work around. So this next illustration demonstrates the before and the after scenario, as you can see on the top two pictures. And the bottom two pictures demonstrate a minimum and a maximum cooling effect that can be achieved. In the minimum cooling scenario, on the left side, demonstrates what would happen if all public space would be gray infrastructure. And on the right side, you will see what would happen if all public place was green infrastructure. So the darker red the circles are, it refers to a heating effect, whereas the dark blue circles refer to a cooling effect. The next case I will discuss is the new business park innovation center named Launchpad, situated on Southend-on-Sea. So as you can see on the image, which is a view from above, in the gray scenario, you had a lot of grassland and impermeable surface, whereas the new scenario, you had a lot of trees added, but also hedges, middle green, flower fields, and impermeable surface. Calculations showed that there was no difference in temperature with outside the project area. However, in the green scenario, a temperature decrease of 0.666 degrees Celsius could be achieved. To put this number into perspective, an average temperature change of 0.66 degrees is an equivalent to the average global temperature increase from the beginning of the 80s up till now. So while the average values that are calculated might seem negligible on paper, it will definitely have a considerable impact on local heat stress relief on hot summer days. Then carbon sequestration. We'll discuss the case of Bruges and Capella. Carbon sequestration is a process by which atmospheric carbon dioxide is taken up by trees, grass, and other plants, do photosynthesis and stored as carbon in biomass and soils. So more green infrastructure means more carbon sequestration. Carbon sequestration is estimated based on the size and the species of woody vegetation, as well as their growth patterns. Furthermore, the below-ground carbon stock was estimated based on soil samples and literature study. Under the supervision of Kent University, some students engaged in field measurements to gather the necessary data. So again, the Capella case, the calculations showed that there was a small difference between the gray and the green scenario. So as you can see on the graph, by 2060, there would be a difference of 37 tons of carbon or 135 tons of carbon dioxide between the before and the after scenario. It is also important to notice that the share of carbon sequestered by trees is smaller in the after scenario than in the green scenario. This can be explained by the fact that a lot of older and bigger trees will need to be removed to make place for new infrastructure, but a lot of new smaller trees will be planted, but it takes time to actually have the same carbon sequestration as the bigger, older trees. So the difference between the gray and the green scenario is about 135 tons of carbon dioxide in the year 2060. So to put this into perspective, carbon emission of 20% of the households in the project area will be sequestered by 2060. In other words, carbon pollution of 1 in 5 households in Wemeldingen North will be neutralized by new green infrastructure in the year 2060. The second case I would like to discuss is Wijnpark ten Boomgaarde in Bruges. As you can see on the figures, the before scenario was already quite green with grass and trees, but the after scenario, the water stream was opened up and a lot of new trees, tall grass and flower fields were added. In general, the calculations shows that there is a decrease in carbon sequestration, but this can again be explained. So when looking at the different habitat types, we again see that the share of carbon sequestration by trees decreases significantly. This is because 60 trees needed to be removed to open up the water stream, and 80 new trees have been planted, yet it takes a lot of time to actually replace the bigger trees. So we discussed this case also to show that trade-offs are inevitable. Although the carbon sequestration in the first 40 years will be less than in the before scenario, improvements in habitat for biodiversity that are created are huge. I will show you the next slides. So as I said before, trade-offs are inevitable, but at least with our tool, these trade-offs are clear and understandable, which can help local authorities to make informed decisions. This brings us to the Habitat for Biodiversity ecosystem service. So decades of research have shown that biodiversity plays a vital role in ecosystem functioning, and that processes such as capturing essential resources, producing biomass, and recycling nutrients are all impaired as biodiversity declines. Furthermore, biodiversity not only underpins ecosystem functioning, it also enables these processes to be resilient in the face of global change. So vegetated green infrastructure features can improve and expand habitat for a wide variety of fauna and flora, which results in more biodiversity. So in our research, we will focus on 4 taxonomic groups: birds, bees, butterflies, and amphibians, by means of 2 methods. Firstly, the average structural diversity. This method is not used to calculate species diversity, but diversity in vegetation structure. So the more vegetation structure, the higher the probability of more biodiversity. Secondly, potential habitat for targeted species. This method is based on the natural elements that different species need to survive in urban areas. The presence of those natural elements will determine whether a species is likely to appear in that area or not. So the more beneficial natural elements that are presented in a certain area, the more likely the area will become a potential habitat for that species. To come back to the Bruges case, as I mentioned before, the variation in green infrastructure has increased significantly. This is also translated in the average structural diversity score, which increased from 2.9 on a scale of 6 to 4.6 on a scale of 6. This is, in other words, a 60% improvement of vegetation diversity. This graph denotes the potential habitat for targeted species. For each biodiversity group, we see that there is a significant increase. The vertical axis denotes that the percentage of species that likes or dislikes a certain habitat, and the colors denotes the suitability of the habitat. So by instance, amphibians, we see that 50% of the amphibian species find it a suitable habitat, whereas the other 50% believe that it's not a suitable habitat at all. But in the green scenario, 50% of the amphibian species find it a very suitable habitat, 40% find it a suitable habitat, and 10% find it a moderate potential habitats. So thus, although carbon sequestration, as I discussed earlier, did not improve that much, at least not in the first couple of years, habitat for biodiversity has undergone a complete transformation. For every biodiversity group, significant improvements are achieved. So the Antwerpen-Zuidrand, or Contig case. Again, the Contig case in the after scenario contains a lot more of green infrastructure diversity than the before scenario. This is also reflected in the average structural diversity biodiversity score. It's changed from 1.9 on a scale of 7 to 4.5 on a scale of 7. So these changes in green infrastructure, means that an average structural diversity increased with 142%. This graph denotes again the potential habitat for targeted species. These figures show that even though the forest zone did decrease, there is still progress in terms of potential habitat for all taxonomic groups. As you can see, the biggest improvement is achieved for bees and amphibians, but even for birds and butterflies, the situation will improve. This brings me to the last ecosystem services I want to discuss, the cultural ecosystem services. Cultural ecosystem services are the non-material benefits people obtain from nature. They include recreation, aesthetic enjoyment, physical and mental health benefits, and so on. They also contribute to a sense of place, foster social cohesion, and are essential for human health and well-being. Although everyone benefits from cultural ecosystem services, their impact on urban life is mostly intangible, and as a result, difficult to measure and quantify. However, cultural ecosystem services are directly experienced and intuitively understood by people who come into contact with nature. We aim to measure this ecosystem service by means of a survey, but this was possible for the Contig case, but not for the case of Den Haag, due to multiple reasons such as the COVID pandemic and the postponement of the opening of the park. It was not possible to conduct a survey. Nevertheless, the literature study demonstrates the significance of cultural ecosystem services. In the gray scenario, we found that there was a limited variation in vegetation. Furthermore, there were a lot of fences surrounding the park, which negatively influences the accessibility and connectivity of the park with the neighborhood. In addition, there were no kinds of educational projects to raise awareness. Whereas in the after scenario, there was a lot of focus on improving the neighborhood and its living environment. It was also deliberately chosen to work in close collaboration with the neighborhood to fulfill their needs and make the Convid Park the heart of the area. The reconstructions also ensured an attractive and pleasant place where people could meet and interact. Furthermore, the facilities such as playgrounds and sport areas were renewed. Also, the fences were removed and new walking ways were implemented, which improved connectivity and accessibility. Lastly, also multiple educational projects were implemented, which focused on climate adaptation, water storage, irrigation, and the functioning of green and blue infrastructure. For the last case, the Antwerpen-Zuidrand, one student did a survey involving 283 people, and the survey demonstrated that although most people already felt safe in the before scenario, the perception of neighborhood safety in the after scenario did improve, especially for people with young children. Also, regarding the indicator perceived quality of urban green space, almost all respondents felt like they have been made multiple improvements. Since the renewal, 25% of the respondents visits the site more often than before, and more respondents enjoy it in comparison to the before scenario. The survey also demonstrated that 50% of respondents visit the place to get a peace of mind and to enjoy nature. Lastly, the survey showed that a quarter does visit the park more often, but it did not cause people to go outside more often. So people might have changed might not have changed the regularity of engaging in physical activity, but they did change the location. Lastly, the indicator for social cohesion. The results show that the majority of people don't really engage in social activity because they came alone or with someone from the same households. But this can also be explained by the COVID pandemic. However, the survey results demonstrated that making contact with strangers did seem easier after the renewal. Half of the respondents felt like a tight community in the park since the renewal, and social inclusion was also often mentioned by respondents, since the park was had possibilities for all age groups, as well as children and people with disabilities. So with this business model, we really try to visualize the results in an understandable way, as we try to realize with this small graph and also the other graphs that I have already shown. So in the next presentation, Wito will explain how the business model actually works, which information you need to fill it in, and which output you can expect. So, thank you.
Thank you very much for this this overview, Myra. And Chris, I would like to invite you to join us on the screen as well. And again, a reminder to the audience, if you have any questions to Myra and or Chris about what you've just heard about the testing of the different ecosystem services impact of the pilots, please drop them in the Q&A. Myra, Chris, having listened to your presentation, it is clear that you've been able to identify impacts of various sizes on a whole range of ecosystem services in the different pilots. At the same time, probably the context and the local setting of each pilot is very different, and this has an effect on the kind of impact that you find on ecosystem services. To what extent does the research that you have done allow you to aggregate quantified statements about impact on a wider diversity of similar settings, or is this very tailor-made type of research? How do you interpret this? Maybe Chris, could you have first go?
Yeah, thanks, Taco, for your question. Well, it's indeed important to take a step-by-step approach. And what we mean by that is that you first identify for the particular case, what are now the key ecosystem services here that are at play. And then you go to the next step and try to quantify them. And just doing this in a very systematic way is really important. And that's also what we did actually in this testing phase. So the first step we took was to ask indeed municipalities, what services do you consider as important here? And for instance, the audience may have noted that in The Hague, we, for instance, did not quantify the carbon sequestration because for the municipality, this was not really of interest there. So this first identification step is really an important one.
And this is one that you do, I interpret from what you are saying, on the one hand, perhaps based on expected areas of most significant impact, but maybe also on the policy or the political landscape. Where is the biggest political interest and what could be the main driver for decision making? Is that right? Is this, Myra, how we can interpret this kind of results as an input for the business model?
Yeah, sure. I totally agree with what Chris said. We really try to take a step-by-step approach and look at every case, very focus on every case in particular. So,
right, thank you. Maybe on one very specific ecosystem service, we picked up a question from the audience a bit earlier on that may be relevant to put to you both. In this wider basket of cultural ecosystem services, the physical and mental health aspect is mentioned. And we had a question from Jonathan Taylor, who was wondering to what extent from your experience in this tool and in this research, the actual mental well-being benefits can really be pointed out and maybe even quantified. Myra, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so as I showed in one of my first slides, mental and physical health is indeed included in our business model. In the business model itself, we don't focus on one ecosystem more than the other, but when you are using the tool, you can actually choose to really focus on, for example, that ecosystem service. So we really try to give a full view of every ecosystem service. Of course, now we will enter a testing phase to see if every ecosystem service is as good presented as we hope it is. So we will see, but it is certainly included in our business model.
Right. And does this, Chris, mean that you, for instance, if there's a very strong and specific interest in mental health in a certain local authority, you could also zoom in on that particular level, or would it always be part of this bigger picture of, let's say, the cultural benefits as you presented in the current analysis?
Especially these cultural services are not that easy to quantify. In that sense, the biophysical services are a bit more straightforward also, but I have to say that still serious thinking has to be done before coming up with numbers there. But yeah, for these cultural services, really to quantify them, very often this survey approach is needed, as also explained by Myra. And mostly you also then capture multiple values at the same time. So yeah, it requires good thinking and again, a good strategy to really quantify this very well.
Right, right. But at least you've been able to develop an initial approach for that and be able to run these kinds of surveys on site. So there's the beginning of the answer. I would like to take another question from the audience, which comes from Johan Asselbergs, which is related to the carbon sequestration benefit. And his question is, the carbon sequestrations are only calculated by trees. So when trees are removed, there you have this setback, but then of course you refer to other types of vegetation that still sequester carbon. The question is, do you also include other, let's say, capturing mechanisms such as soil and water or other ecotopes that might also capture carbon?
Yes, they are actually included. So it's not only about the trees here. So the trees are indeed an important stock of above ground carbon, but we also included I have to admit, simple method to quantify the uptake of carbon in the soil, in the grassy areas or in the semi-paved areas. So that's included, and in the graphs that Myra showed, this was also part of the this was part of the graph, and this is and can be an important component indeed.
Right, and speaking of these carbon sequestration benefits, it was clear from Myra's presentation that there's this long-term perspective needs to be taken in some cases where you may have to take a step back or plant new trees that only yield this sequestration benefit in the longer term. So Myra, how do you think you could sort of capture this as a message also to the decision makers in terms of who will benefit from this investment? It will not be the people living and enjoying the space today, potentially, but it will be in the future. And how can you translate these future benefits into, for instance, financing? Is there a way for you to do this also in your analysis?
Yeah, absolutely. So for some ecosystem services, indeed, the benefits will be later on, but there are other ecosystem services where the benefits are immediate, and we really try to monetize these benefits in our business model. But you can also look at your benefits in like 5 years or 10 years, but even for 40 or 60 years. So it really depends on which time scale the local authority is thinking about. But of course, if you engage in projects like this, you need to be aware that you need to have a long time vision. So
right. So that's this long-term perspective that our panel members earlier spoke about as well. If it's sometimes difficult to develop it, at least the business model will provide some tooling for informing and quantifying those kinds of decisions as well. I'm looking to see if there's any further questions from the audience. It doesn't seem to be the case. Maybe just one last question, and maybe it's a bit of a tricky question or a mean question even. You could argue that, and I think Myra did in her presentation also, that for one ecosystem service, the jump in benefit is much smaller than for the other. Do you think that at some point in time, there will be a sort of a top 10 or a prioritization listing of the most important ecosystem services that can be improved by urban green infrastructures, or will this always be a case-by-case basis with a totally different order per city? Chris, what do you think?
I'm tempted to go for your second scenario. So and personally, I also think it's really important that we do a true case-by-case tailored made analysis, because one of the points that Phil also raised in the very beginning of the seminar was that trust is important, and translation to a local context is really important. And by taking this step-by-step approach and really doing a tailor-made analysis, I think this will raise the level of confidence in what you're doing. And it could well be that indeed, like for instance, urban heat island and so on will be key ecosystem services for the future in most cases, or in many cases. But in a different context, it can also be, like we talked about a lot about water. That's certainly not always relevant or as relevant, but so it can still vary. But yeah, just again, I want to stress this tailor-made approach, and not to kind of automatically quantify this and this and this, and then we are done. So really apply it to the specific case.
Okay, thanks very much. I think this is a clear message, and it also clarifies and justifies why such a broad scope of ecosystem services needs to be in the picture throughout the analysis. I would like to thank you both for your contributions and your explanations, Chris and Myra. And I would like to take it to the next step in our program, where we will be zooming in again on the actual business model. And I would like to ask Vito to come back to the screen and tell us more about the business model in practice.
I'm not able to start my video, so host. Okay, there we are. Thank you, Taco. Good morning again. So we're approaching the final presentations of this morning. I hope it's been informative, but I'm not too shy to say that this is a very important presentation. So if you haven't been paying attention, please do so now. Because in this presentation, all the previous is coming together. And that leads us to the star of this morning's show, which is the Nature Smart Cities business model. In this presentation, I will clearly explain to you the form of the business model, and we will dive into what different steps in this business model are and which input is required to successfully progress through these different steps. Finally, then, we will show you how results can be displayed, and thus how local authorities can directly benefit from using our business model to their green infrastructure case. So linking back to Phil again, we brainstormed about the best feasible technique for local authorities to evidence the value of green infrastructure. Finally, we decided to develop two main outputs, an optimized Excel tool and an extensive guidance document. Additionally, we will generate a series of demonstration videos to help and guide the users through every step of the way. So again, starting on top and having the inputs, what will be delivered for local authorities to overcome existing barriers and to challenge the current status quo. First, a step-by-step method that provides the scientific background and delivers examples and guides local authorities to make estimations of the impact. So this is in the form of the Excel sheet. And then secondly, there's a guidance document for local authorities to successfully complete each of these set steps in order that local authorities can transparently draw the business case for their specific GI project. To give you an idea of the level of inputs that's required, I've provided some examples. So in the first step of our business model, you need to define your envisioned project or the change that you want to reach. So for example, how many trees do you want to plant, the flower fields, how big are the grasslands that you want to plant, and what does the current situation look like? So by putting these two elements into the business model, we can then project what the changes will be in later stages. So step one actually refers to defining your project. This can be done as accurately as desired by the user. One could, for example, opt to do a very quick assessment, or you could do every step in very much detail. Step 2, extra parameters. So these are additional parameters that we need values for in order to estimate the quantitative or monetary impact of ecosystem service changes. For example, how many people are living in the project area, or what's the average annual rainfall, and how much do people pay for their electricity in the area, for example. After having said what form the business model will take and what kind of inputs are required, let's briefly touch on all the different steps in our business model. First step, and I've already mentioned this, is the project description. Next, we have the selection of ecosystem services. This links back to the previous presentation. After selecting these, we require the parameters that I've mentioned, and then steps 3, 4, and 5, they remind us of the pyramid in my first presentation. So we have qualitative assessment, qualification, a quantification, and eventually a monetization. And then finally, the last step is a summary with a preview of a tailor-made fact sheet. So let's dive into a little more detail into step 1. So in this step, users define the general characteristics of the project area. This includes numerically describing the current situation. So for example, the surface area that is now covered with gray infrastructure. And it then also includes the option to add different future scenarios that need to be described as well. So the user just needs to provide the information about green infrastructure types and the amounts of green infrastructure that will be there. In the next step then, these are the ecosystem services that Mayra has explained earlier. And we provide advice based on the previous step on which ecosystem services are likely to be relevant for your types of GI. But the user is free to opt for the ecosystem services that he or she would like to assess the impact for. Then we have our parameter selection. So based on the previous step again, we come to some additional parameters that we need to know in order to progress towards qualification, quantification, and monetary assessment. This brings us to this qualification. So step 3. In this step, users will be guided to write up the impact qualitatively. By displaying this in clear and visual ways, we attempt to improve understanding and provide accessible and easily interpretable information. An example of this is the spider diagram on that left-hand side. Next up is the quantification. In this step, underlying and optimized formulas are generating quantitative results for some of the ecosystem services that were selected. These assessments are based on the parameter selection step and on value transfer methods that underlie this. So here you can see the results that will be generated, and you can tell that they are very similar to the pilot testing results that Mayra has explained some minutes ago, but this is done through our business model. Then the monetization step. So this includes the costs and the benefits assessment. This can be done over a time span that can be chosen by the user. Most likely it will be 20 years or 40 years. And important to note is that we have not only included the construction costs, but also maintenance costs in this assessment. Moreover, users can choose for minimum or optimistic values when we talk about costs, averages, or maximum values. All these data are now stored in our data library and are accessible to the user. However, we also want to ensure flexibility. So our data library can be complemented with custom values in order to allow users to make more accurate estimations based on specific in-house knowledge or the availability of in-house data. This then all comes together after monetizing costs and benefits. Results like these are easy to generate. So note that these specific numbers on these slides are not accurate and are not actual numbers of any case. This is just to provide you with flashes of what it could look like. Also note again that the monetary values are just a subset of the total societal value that is implied with my infamous pyramid. Finally, summarizing all of this and generating a personalized fact sheet is facilitated through our business model. So the main outputs of the case the main outputs of the case that was used are once again displayed in a way that we deem to be very intuitive and valuable to communicate to different stakeholder groups in terms of ecosystem services and differentiating between spatial interpretations. So this leads me to conclude by cautiously suggesting an answer to Phil's consideration at the start of our webinar. Can tools be a solution? Well, we believe that with the tool that we have developed, we are assisting decision makers in producing information about GI investments. We believe that through our business model, we generate estimations of the impacts. We do this, these are displayed in interpretable and communicable ways. And in this manner, they provide the handles to facilitate GI investments. And in doing all of this, we have created a tool that supports decision-making and planning. So can they be a solution? Well, we believe they can, at least, especially if we can adapt our tool even more to the context in which we want it to be used by local authorities. And to do this, we need your help. Tanne will tell you how you can contribute to and at the same time benefit from our business model. Thank you for your attention. Now let's open the floor for questions, if there are any.
Thank you, Vito, for this explanation. So it becomes more and more visual and clear as we progress through the program of today, what this business model actually could look like. I see no questions from the audience. If you do have one, don't hesitate to type it in the Q&A. In the meantime, Vito, the tool or the final product that you showed, this fact sheet, which looks very appealing. At present, do you foresee that someday in the near future, a local authority can simply sit down behind their desk, do a couple of hours of typing and data entry work, and then something like this will automatically roll out, or will they still be dependent very much on the support of experts like yourself?
Well, ideally, that's indeed the scenario that we envision. So we'd want local authorities to very, very easily compile something like this. And we believe, I mean, at this moment, I believe that is definitely the case, that it is possible to do this. The level of detail will not be exact. So that's why we want it to be used in initial stages to give a sense of what impacts will be. But it will definitely provide an oversight, and it's very interpretable, communicable, and that's what we envision with that business model, definitely.
Exactly. So it's not the decimal point calculation that's important, but it's the message that comes across.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's very clear and well noted, Vito. Thanks very much. If there are any further questions, I get a message that there is a. I don't seem to see the question that's. Oh, yeah, there is a question, a very specific question here. Could you explain why is the price of electricity important?
Yeah, well, the price of electricity is important since Mayra has already explained to you the microclimate regulation factor. So by implementing a lot of green infrastructure types, temperature, local temperature at least, is directly influenced. So electricity is involved in a way that the opportunity costs is the cooling, like if people wanted to cool their houses with the same amount of degrees that green infrastructure is able to cool with, that will be the cost. The cost is calculated through this cost of electricity.
Right. So it's basically the monetization of the difference between a tree and an air conditioner that we're looking at, for instance.
Exactly.
Okay, that's understood. Thanks very much. With no further questions in the list, I would like to move to Tanne's presentation. Tanne Schreuder from the City of The Hague. Thank you very much, Vito, for your explanations and contribution. You were announced already, Tanne, as the one who would explain to us and to the audience how all the people listening in can now start participating in the different consecutive steps of the project and how this will go further. So could you please tell us more about that?
Yeah, Sorry, having a little bit of trouble unmuting myself. I hope you guys can all hear me now. Yeah, let me talk to you about the opportunities for you to get involved. So we've been hearing a lot about the process so far. It's been a great learning opportunity for us, along with the academic partners and the city partners. But the goal is, of course, to make something that is bigger than just our project, that is something that can be used within the EU region to help tackle the climate change and what it means for cities and municipalities. So up to now, the project has really focused on the partners within the project, and now we're looking to expand that to a larger group. And that's you guys, of course. So there will be two opportunities that I will be talking to you about today. One is the demonstrator testing that you have been hearing about before as well. And secondly, the capacity building workshops. So Vito just told us a lot about the business model. And I bet you're wondering, well, when can I start using this? Well, the first draft will be ready in just a couple weeks' time. They're working really hard on it at the moment. But this will be the first draft and it will only be internal. But we will use this draft for the demonstrator testing to further develop and enhance the business model to really make sure that it's fit for purpose and that it will in the end help you, the local authority, to create more green infrastructure. A second version will become available in December of this year. And then the final version will be readily available, open to the public at the end of this project in June, July of 2022. So how do you get involved? Well, as I said, there's two opportunities. Firstly, the demonstrator testing, and secondly, the capacity building. Let's start with the demonstrator testing. So far we have been both conceptualizing the business model with the partners within the project, as well as testing the business model within the project. But that leaves some room for improvement because we, of course, have EU funding. So we know that these projects will be realized. But the idea is that the business model will give you more insight into what the green infrastructure will supply for you. And hopefully that information and clearly being able to talk about that and to show a case, the added benefit will allow you to also get decision makers and funding opportunities to make sure that the business, that your green infrastructure is not just an idea, but becomes a reality. So through this demonstrator testing, we are ensuring that this business model is fit for purpose, and it makes sure that the business model gets a little bit better every time. So we're going to be testing the draft, as I mentioned before, and what we're looking for is we're looking for 4 municipalities or local authorities that are willing to get on board and become involved in a project from across the local, from across the 2Cs region. And they will be taking part in a supervised test of the business model for a real life project. So what are we asking from you? What's in it for you? That's more important. Let's start with that part. So you'll be getting new information about the project, hopefully. And as we've discussed multiple times, the business model is really meant to be able to focus on what you want to focus on. So it can be tailored to your situation and what you think will make the most impact for your local authority. And in that, by doing so, that will provide you with new arguments for why this should be realized. And it will also give you a clear comparison with a great alternative or with existing infrastructure to really make clear what your local authority will gain by implementing this green infrastructure. And lastly, you will be the first to have the firsthand experience of using the business model. So what is expected? Firstly, you are located within the Interreg 2Cs area. You have a GI project at the preparatory stage. This is important really so that we can see what the process looks like. Does the business model make sense? Does it help you? And what can you do with those next steps? And then Phil Beck, our lovely consultant that you met at the beginning of this webinar, he will be coming and visiting you live, hopefully, if Corona allows it, and we are assuming that it will. So that'll take about half a day's time where you guys will go through the entire process together. And this provides you with with our assistance, but it also provides us the insight into what were the bumps in the road, and what are the things that we can improve on. Also, I'd like to mention that the demonstrator testing will be conducted in English, as is the discussion afterwards, as will the business model and the guidance document. So how do you apply? Well, an open call has been launched for expressions of interest, and this is open until July 16th. So you still have plenty of time to register. You can do so by visiting our Nature Smart Cities website. Here we also have some further documents going into more detail about how the demonstrator testing will work, what's expected, what it will add. But if you have any questions, feel free to contact Phil. He's always very open to questions and will help you with anything. And the testing will take place in September or October of this year. So we're very much looking forward to that. Then the second opportunity that we have for you today. This is the capacity building program. The capacity building program is a set of workshops that is designed to support smaller local authorities and municipalities in developing more green infrastructure. The content focuses firstly on bridging the knowledge gap. You've heard a lot of information today as well, but we'll go more into depth about that, and also how to self-finance green infrastructure. But the content, that's just a broad idea. We're really looking to tailor this to the local authority. So how we'll be doing that, we will be holding pre-assessment conversations to see what would help you, what would you like to learn, what could these workshops look like for you. And furthermore, these will be held in each of the countries, and they'll be adjusted to national context. So the capacity building program will take place in 2022. So you have some more time there. As I said, it will be rolled out in each of the countries, and it will also be held in the country's languages. The capacity building program consists of 2 one-day workshops. The first one will be somewhere between February and March, and the second between May and June. So registration for this will be possible after the summer. We will launch a system, but if you want to be the first to know when our registration is possible, make sure you subscribe to the newsletter, or of course, follow us on LinkedIn. So here we have the timeline of the business model as a whole. So as I mentioned before, we have the draft coming up. Then we have July, we have the deadline for the application for the demonstrator testing, as well as the selection of the local authorities that will go into that process. It'll be at least 4, but possibly more. So make sure that you sign up. And then the demonstrator testing will be held through September, October. Then in November, December, our academic partners will be hard at work for finding the business model with demonstrator testing recommendations. And then in December, we will have a beta version. Then the capacity building program will take place, and in July, the final version of the business model will be made available. So if you want to get involved, make sure that you do. As mentioned before, we have plenty of information on the website, and we also have the LinkedIn page. Signing up on our newsletter is the best way to make sure that you get the information first. So please feel free to get involved. It would be great. You know, we're doing this project to learn from each other and to tackle this problem in a bigger way. And we need you for that as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tanne. So this is a clear call to action for all those listeners and viewers to get involved in the next steps of the project. I just wanted to quickly put a question to you that we received behind the scenes in the chat, but I think it was only addressed to panelists. So maybe you could also look at or refer to it for the whole audience. So who exactly would be the possible participants, both in the demonstrator testing and in the capacity building? Would this be strictly local authorities, or for instance, also a union of municipalities? Could they participate in either of the two, or one of the two?
Yeah, these are both possible. We're really looking for anybody that can take an active role in implementing green infrastructure. You have seen as well that the province of Antwerp is involved within the project. So we're looking at authorities at different levels to see what the business model could mean for them.
Right. So those in the audience that hesitate or wonder, don't hold back and get involved regardless of the exact scope and nature of your organization.
Exactly.
In the meantime, I also see comments coming in the chat from other, let's say, disciplines or areas of professional interest. For instance, architects and nature conservation organizations that have been listening in today. Do you also see a role for them in either of the two engagement activities that you just presented?
For the oh, I see another question. Sorry, I have to switch some stuff on my screens. Especially for the capacity building program, I think different types of partners would be welcomed. I think from our experience in The Hague as well, we're working alongside different partners in the city, and we need different partners to make sure that we tackle these GI problems. It's not, and especially climate change as a whole and climate adaptation, it's not one party can solve this. No, we need to work together to do this. So I think especially in the capacity building program, that would be great. Phil, for the demonstrator testing, if you can let me know in the chat, that would also be great. And then for the geographical area, I see that Pete asked the question. So that would be anybody within the UK, the Netherlands, Belgium, or France.
That's right. Any further questions from the audience? I think we've fed you with a considerable meal of content and inspiration on developing green infrastructures. So maybe it is time to wrap up. Tana, I would like to thank you very much for your clear invitation to the audience to participate in the continuation of the Nature Smart Cities project. For today, I think this is where we close our meeting, but not before I have said thank you to all the members of the audience for participating, for interacting with us, and hopefully also for engaging in the next steps of the project. So do get in touch with Phil, with Tana through the website and make sure that you join. We hope that you have enjoyed today's webinar. We will make sure that you receive the documents and presentations that were used today. And we will also at some point in the near future share a video recording of this webinar for those of you that have colleagues that would like to still look at bits and pieces of the seminar. I would also like to thank our speakers and our panelists for their contributions, and of course the wonderful colleagues of LEF, the event management agency that made the technical side of this event possible. I would like to say goodbye to you, and I hope to see you in one of the next engagement opportunities of the Nature Smart Cities, so that all of us can work together greening the cities of the 2Cs region. Have a very good day and see you all soon.